Welcome to the deep dive. We're so glad you're joining us today.
Absolutely.
Because if you've been looking at the news lately, you probably feel like you are standing directly in front of a fire hose. The sheer volume of information coming out right now is just staggering.
It really is.
Today's stack of sources is this incredibly dense, highly varied dump of breaking news from this current month, March 2026. We're looking at a landscape spanning unprecedented global energy crises, bizarre shifts in the entertainment industry, monumental clashes between the government and the tech sector, and even, fundamental ground-level changes in your everyday consumer habits.
Yeah, it's a profound amount of data to process. When you look at the raw intelligence, the financial reporting, the political maneuvers, and the cultural shifts all happening simultaneously, it can be entirely overwhelming for anyone just trying to keep track of the broader narrative.
Exactly. And that is exactly why we're here. Our mission today is to take this mountain of financial, political, tech, and cultural reporting from our sources and extract the most vital nuggets of knowledge. We want to synthesize all of this so that you can walk away from this deep dive perfectly well informed, seeing those invisible threads connecting these events without feeling buried by the information overload.
Right, but before we jump in, it is absolutely crucial that we establish the framework for our discussion today, because our sources contain highly charged political developments, including actions by the current U.S. administration, the ongoing U.S.-Iran war, and various domestic political investigations. I need to explicitly state to you that this deep dive is entirely impartial.
Very important point.
Yes, we are simply reporting the facts, the raw data, and the specific viewpoints contained within the source material you've provided us. We are taking absolutely no sides here, and we are not endorsing any political ideology, whether left-wing or right-wing. Our goal is strictly analytical and informational, conveying the ideas contained in the original sources impartially so you can understand the mechanics of what is actually happening.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the most immediate, sweeping event dominating the global stage right now, which is the ongoing U.S. and Israeli war on Iran, officially entering its 10th day. And before we get into the massive economic ramifications, we really have to acknowledge the very real, tragic human cost on the ground. According to our sources, the Pentagon just identified the 7th U.S. service member killed in this conflict.
Yes, the human toll is a sobering reality that really anchors all of these geopolitical discussions. The Defense Department identified the fallen service member as 26-year-old Army Sergeant Benjamin Pennington.
Such a young guy.
It is heartbreaking. He was a resident of Glendale, Kentucky, assigned to the 1st Space Battalion, 1st Space Brigade, out of Fort Carson, Colorado.
I was reading through the details of the engagement. He died from wounds he sustained during an Iranian strike at the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And for you listening, just trying to picture the geography, Prince Sultan is a major hub located in the desert south of Riyadh. It's historically been this critical logistical point for U.S. operations in the Middle East. Sergeant Pennington was wounded a week prior to his passing, meaning the medical teams were likely fighting for days to save him.
That is the tragic reality of these forward-deployed outposts. He joins 6 other U.S. soldiers who have lost their lives in the span of just over a week. Vice President J.D. Vance actually addressed this grim milestone during a speech at the International Association of Firefighters Legislative Conference in Washington.
Right, he asked for prayers.
He did. He asked the audience for prayers for the fallen, specifically mentioning the 6 souls already lost and the 7th, Sergeant Pennington, whose remains were expected to be returned to U.S. soil later that day. It serves as a stark reminder to the public of the ultimate price being extracted in real time.
It really does. And while the U.S. absorbs these losses, we are seeing sweeping historic shifts happening within Iran's leadership structure, which fundamentally alters the diplomatic calculus. Following the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on the very first day of the Allied strikes, Iran has officially named his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader.
And this transition of power is monumental. To give you some context, Mojtaba Khamenei has long been considered a shadowy but immensely powerful figure behind the scenes.
He's the one with the military ties, right?
Exactly. He has maintained incredibly tight ties with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. By elevating him, Tehran is sending a crystal clear signal to the international community that the hardline, uncompromising faction remains firmly in control. There will be no softening of their stance.
And that hardened stance is already echoing through their official channels. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghai, came out with some intensely defiant rhetoric defending their counterattacks on U.S. assets. He didn't just brush it off. He actually mounted a specific legal defense.
He did, arguing that targeting U.S. military bases and assets in the region is completely legitimate under international law. He specifically cited Article 51 of the United Nations Charter.
Which says what exactly?
For a bit of legal context, Article 51 recognizes the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations. So Iran is positioning its strikes not as offensive terrorism, but as a legally sanctioned defense against Western aggressors.
Right, and he took it a step further, which brings us to the most perilous part of this entire situation. Boghai issued a direct, unequivocal warning regarding the Strait of Hormuz. He stated that as long as the situation remains insecure, all oil tankers and maritime navigation, quote, must be very careful.
A thinly veiled threat.
Exactly. He explicitly noted that any installations or assets used to assist the U.S. are regarded by Iran as legitimate targets. That entirely explains the recent Iranian attacks on Gulf state infrastructure, like those desalination plants in Bahrain and the oil refineries in Saudi Arabia. They are systematically targeting the logistical support network of the U.S. military.
And that explicit threat to the Strait of Hormuz is exactly what is sending absolute shockwaves through the global economic system right now. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz is essentially the jugular vein of global energy.
It's tiny, isn't it?
Very narrow. It's a waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, and at its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only about 2 miles wide in either direction.
Let's dive into the market reaction to this closure, because the numbers we are seeing are staggering. We saw U.S. West Texas Intermediate, or WTI crude, briefly shoot past $119 a barrel. Brent crude hit $119.50.
Massive spikes.
Just to clarify the terminology for you listening, WTI is the benchmark for crude oil extracted in the United States, usually lighter and sweeter, which makes it ideal for gasoline. Brent crude is the international benchmark, extracted from the North Sea. When both of these benchmarks spike simultaneously to near $120, reaching levels we haven't seen since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it means the global market is pricing in an apocalyptic supply shortage.
What's fascinating here is the sheer unprecedented scale of the disruption we're witnessing. We have compelling data from the consulting firm Rapidan Energy that really puts this into sharp historical context. They are officially classifying this current bottleneck as the largest single oil supply disruption in human history.
Human history, that is heavy.
It is. Right now, because the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed to commercial traffic due to the severe threat of Iranian anti-ship missiles and drone attacks, roughly 20% of the world's total oil supply is completely trapped.
20%. I want to emphasize how staggering that is for you listening. We're talking about 1/5 of the energy that powers global civilization simply vanishing from the open market overnight.
To truly understand the gravity of that number, Rapidan Energy compared it to previous historical crises that completely reshaped the modern world. Think back to the 1956 Suez Crisis, when Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, leading to the closure of the Suez Canal. That event disrupted about 10% of the world's oil supply, and it caused global diplomatic chaos.
And then there was the 70s, right?
Yes. Consider the famous 1973 Arab oil embargo. That embargo caused massive lines at gas stations across the United States, forced a global recession, and fundamentally reshaped the automotive industry toward fuel efficiency. Do you know how much supply was disrupted in 1973? Only 7%.
That is wild. So we are currently looking at a disruption nearly 3 times larger than the crisis that caused the infamous gas lines of the 1970s. But I have to play devil's advocate here based on our forces.
Yeah.
We've survived oil shocks before. The global market is generally pretty resilient. Why is this specific 20% disruption uniquely dangerous compared to past shocks?
That is the central issue, and it comes down to a fundamental concept in commodities trading called spare capacity. Spare capacity is essentially the world's emergency cushion. It's the amount of oil production that can be brought online within 30 days and sustained for at least 90 days.
Like a backup generator.
Precisely. In the past, if there was a sudden disruption, say a pipeline explosion in Nigeria or a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, other major producers could simply ramp up their extraction to fill the gap and stabilize prices. Historically, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have acted as these swing producers. They deliberately keep millions of barrels of production capacity offline, specifically to manage these types of global crises.
But the geographic reality of this current war means they are completely sidelined.
Exactly. Saudi Arabia and the UAE hold the overwhelming majority of the world's spare capacity. But look at a map. They are geographically located inside the Persian Gulf. Because the Strait of Hormuz is the only maritime exit for those specific oil terminals, their spare capacity is entirely cut off from the global market.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Rapidan notes that outside of the Gulf, there is currently zero meaningful spare capacity available anywhere in the world to offset this 20% drop. You have the primary holders of the emergency supply physically trapped behind the exact same blockade that is causing the shortage.
It's like having a state-of-the-art backup generator, but it's locked inside the basement of a burning building. You know it's there, but it's entirely useless to you. So with the strait closed, where does Iran's own domestic oil infrastructure fit into the strategic picture? Because a lot of the military analysis in our sources is focusing heavily on Karg Island.
Karg Island is essentially the beating heart of Iran's entire oil export economy. It is a small coral island located about 15 miles off the coast of mainland Iran in the northern Persian Gulf. Despite its incredibly small geographic footprint, it is a marvel of industrial engineering. It handles an estimated 90% of Iran's crude exports, boasting a loading capacity of roughly 7 million barrels per day. It is the financial engine of the Iranian state.
And remarkably, through 10 days of intense warfare, it hasn't been touched by U.S. or Israeli forces. But according to our intelligence sources, that might be changing. President Trump is reportedly considering seizing the island outright. Jan van Eck, the CEO of Van Eck Funds, drew a very compelling parallel in the financial press to the administration's actions in Venezuela earlier in the year.
Right, the oil sector takeover.
Yes, in that instance, the U.S. essentially took control of the country's oil sector to starve the regime of its hard currency. Seizing Karg Island would be a fatal blow to Tehran's revenue stream.
While the strategic appeal is obvious, practically executing that maneuver is incredibly complex. Mark Gustafson, a former head of the White House Situation Room, provided some excellent analysis on this. He pointed out that while taking the island might offer a phenomenal public relations victory and grant the U.S. maximum economic leverage, seizing and holding it would absolutely require U.S. ground troops. It cannot be done solely from the air or from naval destroyers.
And so far, the administration has shown extreme hesitation regarding committing actual boots on the ground in Iranian territory.
For good reason. Occupying Karg Island would instantly turn U.S. troops into static targets. They would be sitting ducks for Iranian drone swarms and ballistic missiles over a multi-week occupation. Furthermore, there's a significant tactical risk that retreating Iranian forces could simply sabotage their own pipelines and loading terminals on the island, utilizing a scorched earth policy to prevent the U.S. from utilizing the facility anyway.
Okay, so that paints a vivid picture of the crude oil crisis. But our sources highlight another massive energy market that might actually be far more vulnerable here, and that is liquefied natural gas, or LNG. I found this part of the reading fascinating because roughly 20% of global LNG also flows through the exact same Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, and from an engineering perspective, the LNG situation might actually be much more precarious than crude oil. With crude oil, some countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built overland pipeline alternatives that can bypass the strait and deliver oil directly to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Oman.
So they have backdoor.
Right. Those pipelines are limited in capacity, but they exist. Natural gas doesn't have that logistical luxury. The vast majority of the LNG exported from the Middle East comes from one single country, and that's Qatar. Specifically, it comes from the sprawling Ras Laffan industrial complex.
And Qatar officially halted their LNG output after an Iranian drone attack occurred nearby, correct? They just shut it down.
They did, declaring force majeure. And the global market reaction was instantaneous and violent. European natural gas prices surged 63% last week alone. That is the largest percentage gain we've seen since the onset of the Ukraine war in March 2022. Asian prices spiked even higher. We actually saw reports of LNG transport vessels literally making U-turns in the middle of the ocean to redirect their cargo toward Asian ports where the spot prices were suddenly incredibly lucrative.
So to break this down for you listening, why is LNG so much more vulnerable to disruption than crude oil? If the military clears the strait tomorrow, why can't Qatar just turn the gas back on like a giant faucet?
To understand the vulnerability, you have to look at the extreme physics of liquefied natural gas. Turning crude oil production on and off is relatively straightforward. It's mostly a matter of valves and pumps. LNG, however, requires taking natural gas and cooling it to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit so it condenses into a liquid state, reducing its volume by 600 times so it can fit on a ship.
Minus 260 degrees.
Exactly. This requires massive, incredibly complex refrigeration plants. It is a highly sensitive, continuous industrial process. Alex Munton from Rapidan Energy explained that the entire Ras Laffan plant in Qatar has never been taken completely offline before, ever.
Wow, so they are in totally uncharted territory.
Completely. Restarting a cryogenic facility of that magnitude isn't a matter of flipping a switch. It requires a meticulous, phased process of pressure testing and temperature calibration that will take weeks, not days. And the operators won't even begin that multi-week restart process until they're 100% certain the maritime route is safe. Keep in mind, a single specialized LNG tanker can cost upwards of $250 million to insure and replace. You don't send a $250 million ship carrying highly flammable liquid into a war zone.
Makes total sense.
Plus, unlike crude oil, which is extracted from thousands of fields across dozens of countries, Middle Eastern LNG is heavily concentrated in this one massive Qatari complex. As Munton aptly put it, the entire global LNG supply chain right now is a sitting duck.
So we have this unprecedented bottleneck. Crude oil is touching $120. European gas is up 63%. The world is holding its breath. And then suddenly, the market completely whipsaws. We saw the S&P 500, the Dow, and the NASDAQ actually turn positive. The Dow had been down nearly 900 points in early trading, and oil plummeted from almost $120 back down to around $81 a barrel. What on earth caused that massive, sudden reversal in sentiment?
The reversal was entirely triggered by statements from President Trump. In a phone conversation with a CBS News reporter, Trump casually stated that the war is, quote, very complete, pretty much. He cited the near-total destruction of Iran's naval capabilities, their communication grids, and their air force. He claimed the U.S. military is very far ahead of his initial 4 to 5 week timeline for the operation. Crucially for the markets, he also mentioned that commercial ships were starting to cautiously move through the strait again, and reiterated that he was considering taking it over to ensure security.
And there was also diplomatic movement involving Russia, right?
Yes. Adding fuel to the market rally, the Kremlin officially reported that Trump had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, during which Putin supposedly shared concrete proposals about quickly ending the conflict. So the algorithms and the commodity traders essentially priced in a best-case scenario a rapid, decisive resolution to the conflict that avoids a protracted regional war.
At the same time, we have the G7 energy ministers holding emergency virtual meetings to discuss releasing strategic oil stockpiles. They're trying to coordinate a massive dump of reserves to flood the market and artificially suppress prices. But amidst all this high-level international maneuvering, there is some incredibly intense domestic political friction happening regarding energy policy, specifically a bizarre love triangle involving the U.S., Russia, and India.
This is a very tangled, deeply cynical web of geopolitics and economics. Currently, there are millions of barrels of Russian oil stranded at sea on what's known as the shadow fleet. This oil is unsellable due to strict U.S. and European sanctions related to Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. However, in a desperate attempt to ease the soaring global oil prices caused by the Iran conflict, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent issued a temporary 30-day waiver, specifically allowing Indian refiners to purchase this sanctioned Russian oil.
Which, if you look at it purely through the lens of domestic economics, seems pragmatic. Energy Secretary Chris Wright argued that this waiver diverts oil that would otherwise eventually be smuggled to China, and it helps stabilize the global market until the U.S. achieves its military aims in Iran. He's looking at the math of supply and demand, but congressional Democrats are looking at the geopolitical optics, and they're absolutely furious.
Rightly so, from a strategic standpoint. Representative Sam Liccardo and Senator Ruben Gallego sent a scathing, highly publicized letter to the Treasury Secretary demanding the waiver be reversed immediately. They didn't mince words. They called the decision dangerous, self-defeating, and indefensible. Their argument hinges on recent, highly credible intelligence reports suggesting that Russia has been actively assisting Iran.
Specifically, the intelligence suggests Russia is providing satellite data and reconnaissance to help Iran locate and target U.S. ships, aircraft, and regional bases.
Exactly. So the Democrats are arguing that by granting this waiver, the U.S. is essentially rewarding Russia financially, allowing them to monetize their stranded assets, while Russia simultaneously helps Iran try to kill American troops. They state that the waiver provides an inexplicable act of material benefit to the enemy.
But the Treasury Department is pushing back hard on that narrative, right? They have a completely different interpretation of how oil revenue actually works.
They do. A source familiar with the Treasury's thinking explained the mechanics of Russian taxation to CNBC. The Russian government generates the vast majority of its energy revenues through taxes and royalties imposed at the wellhead, meaning when the oil is first extracted from the ground in Siberia or the Urals. They don't generate massive revenue at the point of final sale.
Okay.
Therefore, the Treasury argues, allowing the sale of oil that is already extracted and loaded on vessels in the middle of the ocean doesn't provide a significant new financial windfall to Putin's war machine. The tax was already collected months ago.
It's a staggering geopolitical balancing act. You are trying to lower domestic gas prices without funding a proxy adversary who's helping your current adversary. And for you listening, I want to bridge the gap between these high-level political debates and your daily life. We're talking about coral islands in the Persian Gulf, complex cryogenic LNG plants in Qatar, and obscure Russian tax structures. But all of this translates directly and painfully to your wallet. Before this conflict, the national average for gasoline in the U.S. was hovering around $3.47 a gallon. But Denton Cinquegrana, the chief oil analyst at OPIS, expects the national average to breach $4 a gallon by the end of this week. That is the immediate, real-world consequence of a blocked waterway halfway across the globe.
And that profound economic anxiety is exactly why energy policy becomes such a highly charged, uncompromising political issue. When voters feel the pain at the pump, incumbents lose their jobs.
Moving from the physical, tangible risks of war and oil, let's seamlessly transition into a different, much more abstract kind of risk. I want to talk about the commodification of risk itself, and how technology, specifically artificial intelligence and digital platforms, is completely blurring the lines of national security. Let's start by examining prediction markets. These platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi have exploded in popularity over the last year.
For listeners who might not be familiar with the mechanics, prediction markets are essentially event-driven financial exchanges. They are regulated to varying degrees by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in the U.S. Users purchase shares that act as binary options, yes or no, based on the outcomes of real-world events. If you buy a yes share for 60 cents and the event happens, the contract resolves at $1, netting you a 40-cent profit. They act as financial derivatives, crowdsourcing probability.
And they have come under immense, intense fire recently, precisely because of the Iran war. Here is a detail from our sources that genuinely made me pause. Polymarket actually had to step in and archive a betting market that was taking wagers on the exact timing of a nuclear detonation.
What's fascinating here is the intersection of technology, finance, and morality becoming incredibly fraught. You had a highly liquid market literally titled, "Nuclear Weapon Detonation by What Date?", where anonymous users were betting hundreds of thousands of dollars on whether an atomic weapon would be used by a specific time frame.
But so dystopian.
Polymarket actually posted the real-time odds on their X account, which they later scrambled to delete, showing a mathematically calculated 22% probability of a nuclear detonation occurring by year-end based on the trading volume.
But wait, I have to push back on the defense of this. I understand the argument that markets aggregate data, but isn't there a massive, terrifying difference between innovating financial data and literally incentivizing insiders to trigger a conflict? You are betting on the end of the world.
It certainly drew a fierce public outcry, and your concern is exactly what lawmakers are echoing. However, the CEO of Polymarket, Shane Copeland, vigorously defended the concept at a recent sports analytics conference. He called the ethics a complicated question, but argued that prediction markets serve a vital, powerful informational function. He believes that by attaching financial consequences to predictions, you strip away punditry and bias, revealing the true probability of an event. He dismissed the moral criticism as a knee-jerk resistance to innovation, stating that's what makes it innovative and disruptive.
But lawmakers are absolutely not buying that defense. They aren't looking at this as a data experiment. They're looking at it as a national security vulnerability.
Precisely. They are taking aggressive legislative action. Senator Merkley and Senator Klobuchar have introduced the End Prediction Market Corruption Act. The primary goal of this bill is to bar the president, the vice president, members of Congress, and their immediate families from trading these event contracts.
Because there are massive, flashing red concerns about insider trading, right? If you know a strike is happening tomorrow, you could make millions.
Exactly. And this isn't a theoretical concern. The legislation was spurred by highly suspicious, incredibly well-timed wagers that netted anonymous traders hundreds of thousands of dollars. For instance, a blockchain crypto analytics firm called Bubble Maps identified 6 suspected insiders who made a collective $1.2 million wager that the U.S. would strike at Iran just hours before the missiles actually launched.
Hours before. Unbelievable.
The market for the timing of those strikes had accumulated over $500 million in total bets. The liquidity was massive. Lawmakers like Senator Chris Murphy and Representative Mike Levin are proposing secondary bills to outright restrict markets that resolve on military actions, regime change, or assassinations, arguing they directly incentivize conflict or reward the illegal access of classified information.
It's turning geopolitical horror into a digital casino game. And speaking of the fraught intersection of technology and national security, we have a monumental lawsuit unfolding right now that could reshape the tech industry. Anthropic, which is one of the leading artificial intelligence companies in the world, is suing the Trump administration.
This is an entirely unprecedented situation in the history of American tech. The Pentagon officially designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk. To understand the gravity of that, you have to know that this designation is an extraordinary move, historically and exclusively reserved for foreign adversaries like the Chinese telecom giant Huawei. It is almost never used against a domestic San Francisco-based tech darling.
So what does that supply chain risk designation actually mean for Anthropic on a mechanical level? It's not just a bad PR day.
It is a financial and operational blockade. It means that any defense vendor, contractor, or subcontractor is legally required to certify that they do not use Anthropic's AI models, which are known under the brand name Claude, in any of their work with the Pentagon. Anthropic is currently arguing in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California that this administrative action is entirely unlawful and is causing immediate irreparable harm. They claim ongoing contracts are being canceled overnight, and it jeopardizes hundreds of millions of dollars in near-term enterprise revenue. They are also taking a constitutional angle, claiming it's a retaliatory attack on their First Amendment freedoms.
But how did the relationship sour so quickly? Because I was looking at the timeline, and Anthropic had just signed a $200 million contract with the Department of Defense back in July. They were heavily touted as the very first AI lab to successfully deploy their models on highly classified government networks. What broke?
The conflict centers fundamentally around how the AI models can be legally and ethically utilized. Anthropic employs a specific safety architecture known as constitutional AI, where the model is trained to refuse certain harmful prompts based on a foundational set of ethical rules. The Department of Defense, seeking maximum operational flexibility, wanted unfettered, unrestricted access to the AI models across all lawful military purposes.
Anthropic said no.
Anthropic dug in their heels. They demanded explicit contractual assurances that their Claude models would not be used for fully autonomous weapons systems, meaning weapons that can decide to kill without human intervention, or for domestic mass surveillance programs. They refused to cross those ethical red lines.
And the administration did not take kindly to being dictated to by a tech company.
Not at all. In response to Anthropic's refusal, President Trump posted a scathing message on Truth Social, directing all federal agencies to immediately cease using the, quote, radical left AI company. The administration's argument is fundamentally that the democratically elected government, not unelected Silicon Valley tech executives, should dictate the military capabilities and the ultimate fate of the country's defense infrastructure.
It really highlights the severe growing tension between private AI ethics boards and government defense mandates. And as these AI models get more powerful, securing them and preventing them from going rogue becomes an entirely new multi-billion-dollar industry. Look at OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. They just acquired a specialized cybersecurity startup called PromptFu.
Yes, and this acquisition tells us exactly where the bleeding edge of the industry is heading. PromptFu provides highly specialized tools to safeguard, stress test, and validate complex AI systems. OpenAI is explicitly integrating these tools into their new Frontier platform, which is designed specifically for AI agents.
I want to define that term clearly for you listening, because it is the next massive leap in tech. When we say AI agents, we don't just mean a chatbot that writes an email for you. We mean an autonomous software entity that can take sequential actions across different software programs to achieve a goal.
Exactly. An AI agent can log into your bank, download a spreadsheet, format the data, draft a financial report, and email it to your boss, all without your intervention. Ian Webster, the CEO of PromptFu, stated that as these AI agents become deeply connected to real, sensitive enterprise data and operational systems, securing them is exponentially more challenging than securing a simple chatbot.
Because the damage they can do is so much higher.
Precisely. If an AI agent has the autonomous power to execute financial trades, send company-wide emails, or access classified databases, the cybersecurity perimeter has to be absolutely flawless. You cannot have an AI agent going rogue due to a hallucination or being easily manipulated by a malicious prompt injection from a hacker. The blast radius for failure is too large.
And it's not just digital software where this risk resides. Artificial intelligence is aggressively bleeding into our physical reality. Amazon's autonomous vehicle unit, known as Zoox, is rapidly expanding its robotaxi testing into Dallas and Phoenix.
This represents a massive, necessary step in deploying artificial intelligence into unpredictable, high-stakes physical environments. Zoox has already served over 300,000 riders in relatively controlled or familiar environments like Las Vegas and San Francisco. But now they are deploying a fleet of retrofitted Toyota Highlander SUVs in Dallas and Phoenix. Their goal is to meticulously map these new areas and stress test their AI against completely different physical paradigms.
Right, because driving in San Francisco is very different from driving in the desert. They specifically mentioned in their press release wanting to test their LiDAR sensors and battery thermal management against the extreme blistering heat and the sudden dust storms on high-speed roads in Phoenix. In Dallas, they are focusing on diverse, unpredictable weather patterns and incredibly complex high-speed highway interchanges. They have to mathematically prove the AI can handle extreme, chaotic physical variables before they officially roll out their actual custom-built, toaster-shaped robotaxis to the public.
And that physical testing is non-negotiable for public trust.
Exactly. I want you to think about that progression for a second. We have artificial intelligence managing highly classified defense data. We have autonomous AI agents executing complex financial tasks across private networks. And we have AI piloting 4,000-pound vehicles through blinding dust storms in Arizona. How comfortable do you feel with artificial intelligence managing real-world, physical, and geopolitical risks? The technology is moving incredibly fast, and the guardrails are being built while the car is already speeding down the highway.
That's a dizzying pace.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pivot and look at the corporate titans in domestic politics, starting with a massive story that perfectly merges both realms. Recent government disclosures revealed that President Trump bought millions of dollars in corporate bonds during a highly publicized, incredibly cutthroat corporate bidding war.
Yes, the timing, the specific targets, and the scale of these financial purchases are raising significant questions in the financial press. According to the mandatory U.S. Office of Government Ethics disclosures, the president bought between $1.1 million and $2.25 million worth of Netflix corporate bonds and simultaneously purchased between $500,000 and $1 million of Warner Bros. Discovery bonds.
Let's contextualize the timing, because that is what makes this so fascinating. This happened right between December and January. That was exactly in the middle of the intense, multi-billion-dollar bidding war, where Paramount's Skydance, which is famously backed by Larry Ellison's son, David Ellison, was trying to acquire Warner Bros. Discovery, and Netflix was aggressively trying to swoop in and disrupt the deal.
Correct. Now, structurally, it is important to note the legal landscape here. Under current U.S. law, presidents are uniquely exempt from the strict conflict of interest statutes that prohibit other executive branch officials like cabinet members or agency heads from investing in companies that have active business or regulatory matters before the government. The White House maintains there is absolutely no conflict of interest, stating that the assets are held in a trust managed independently by his children.
But the optics are what the market is heavily focusing on, because while he was quietly buying up these corporate bonds, he was publicly and loudly weighing in on the viability of the merger. Let's break down what a bond purchase like this actually means for you listening. If you buy a corporate bond, you are essentially loaning money to the company, and the value of that bond fluctuates based on the market's perception of the company's health and their ability to pay you back.
Exactly. And days after the potential Netflix and Warner Bros. Merger was leaked to the press, Trump explicitly told reporters that the concentration of market power from such a deal could be a problem, heavily signaling to Wall Street that his administration might initiate severe antitrust scrutiny to block Netflix. Furthermore, he publicly pressured Netflix to fire one of their prominent board members, Susan Rice, a former high-ranking Obama administration official. So you have the sitting president buying debt in a company while simultaneously making public, market-moving statements that directly impact the valuation of that company and the viability of a historic merger.
And ultimately, the pressure worked.
Yeah.
Netflix bowed out of the bidding, and Paramount, backed by the Ellison family, who were major Republican mega donors and close Trump allies, won the bid for a staggering $110 billion.
And the financial mechanics of the bond purchases are particularly interesting. The disclosures indicate the Netflix bonds were trading at a distressed level of around $1.03 to $1.04 on the dollar when the trust purchased them, meaning the market viewed them as somewhat risky amidst the merger chaos. The Warner Bros. Bonds were bought between 91.75 and 92 cents on the dollar, essentially bought at a discount. Today, those same Warner Bros. Bonds are worth 95 cents on the dollar, meaning those specific bonds are currently in the money, generating a profit. It is a prime, highly visible example of the intersecting lines between personal wealth management and the immense gravity of presidential influence.
Moving to another massive landscape-altering corporate story, we have some potentially excellent news for anyone who's ever tried to buy a concert ticket. Live Nation, the monolithic parent company of Ticketmaster, has finally reached a landmark antitrust settlement with the Department of Justice.
Ticketmaster has faced intense bipartisan scrutiny for years. The core allegation has always been that their overwhelming dominance in both venue management and live event ticketing allows them to artificially inflate prices, tack on exorbitant junk fees, and completely stifle market competition. The public anger really boiled over during the disastrous, heavily botched ticketing process for Taylor Swift's Eras tour. That debacle prompted the DOJ, along with over 24 state attorneys general, to file a massive lawsuit in 2024 aimed at fundamentally breaking up the company.
So what does this new settlement actually mandate? How does it change the ecosystem?
The settlement attacks the structural advantages Live Nation holds. First, they have agreed to pay roughly $280 million in civil penalties. But more importantly for the industry structure, the DOJ is forcing them to unwind 13 exclusive booking agreements with major amphitheaters across the country. Historically, if a venue wanted Live Nation to bring them top-tier artists, they were forced to use Ticketmaster exclusively for their ticketing. This settlement breaks that chain.
Which is huge for venues.
It is. Furthermore, Ticketmaster must offer a standalone third-party ticketing API. This means competing platforms like SeatGeek or AXS can seamlessly integrate with Ticketmaster's back-end technology, opening the door for genuine consumer choice at the point of sale. Live Nation's CEO, Michael Rapino, defended their past practices, claiming their market dominance was purely due to having superior technology, not coercive exclusivity, but he stated they are happy to empower venues with more ticketing choices moving forward.
But I was reading the state-level reactions, and this isn't a done deal across the board, is it? The states are rebelling.
They are. New York Attorney General Letitia James, acting in concert with the attorneys general of more than 20 other states, is flatly refusing to agree to the terms of the settlement. She released a blistering statement, arguing that the DOJ's settlement is merely a behavioral remedy, not a structural one. She stated it fails to address the monopoly at the center of this case and would ultimately benefit Live Nation at the continuing expense of consumers. The states want a forced divestiture. They want Live Nation and Ticketmaster split into two separate companies. So the complex legal battle over the future of live event ticketing is far from over.
We're also seeing sweeping, dramatic shakeups in the pharmaceutical industry. Shares of the telehealth and prescription company Hims & Hers surged an incredible 40% in a single day of trading.
This massive valuation surge was the direct result of Hims & Hers ending a bitter, high-stakes legal dispute with Novo Nordisk. For context, Novo Nordisk is the pharmaceutical giant behind the blockbuster weight loss drugs Ozempic and Wegovy.
Hims & Hers had been making an absolute fortune selling what are known as compounded or copycat versions of these drugs for a fraction of the cost, right? They were selling monthly subscriptions for like $49 compared to the nearly $1,000 price tag for the brand name pens. Let's explain what these drugs actually are. Ozempic and Wegovy are GLP-1 receptor agonists. Biologically, they mimic a hormone in your gut that regulates blood sugar and slows down digestion, making you feel incredibly full and significantly dampening the food noise in your brain. It's a miracle drug for obesity.
Exactly. And because the demand for these drugs was so astronomical, Novo Nordisk physically could not manufacture enough of the injector pens to keep up. This triggered an official FDA shortage. There is a specific loophole in U.S. pharmaceutical regulations that states if an FDA-approved drug is officially listed in shortage, highly regulated compounding pharmacies are legally allowed to create their own copycat versions of the active ingredient to ensure patients get care.
Ah, so that's how they did it.
Right. But Novo Nordisk sued Hims for mass illegal compounding, arguing that the supply shortages were essentially resolved and that Hims was utilizing deceptive marketing tactics that risked patient safety by selling unregulated biological copies.
So they went to war. And what are the final terms of the settlement that sent the stock soaring?
It's a highly strategic pivot for Hims. They agreed to immediately cease heavily marketing and advertising their compounded GLP-1 drugs to the broad consumer market. They will restrict access to the compounded versions only to very rare, specific, FDA-compliant medical cases. In exchange, Novo Nordisk dropped the massive patent infringement lawsuit. But here's the kicker. Hims will now offer the official, authentic, FDA-approved Wegovy and Ozempic directly through their telehealth platform at the exact same price as their major competitors. They essentially use the compounded drugs to acquire millions of users, and now they are transitioning those users onto the legitimate brand name supply chain without the legal risk.
The FDA Commissioner, Marty McCary, was apparently very pleased with this resolution. He noted that it keeps the drugs accessible while pushing patients safely toward fully vetted, FDA-approved products. But speaking of the FDA, there is a tremendous amount of internal turmoil and ideological battling happening within the agency right now.
There is. Vinay Prasad, the powerful director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, which essentially makes him the top official overseeing vaccines, gene therapies, and biologic drugs at the FDA, announced he is stepping down in April.
Why the sudden departure?
His entire tenure has been marked by intense controversy, philosophical shifts, and severe industry backlash. Over the past year, under Prasad's leadership, the FDA has aggressively denied or strongly discouraged approval applications for at least 8 major drugs. Pharmaceutical companies have loudly accused the FDA of constantly moving the goalposts, reversing previous guidance on what clinical evidence is required for approval, and creating massive, costly regulatory uncertainty.
Can you give an example of that?
A prime example was the FDA actively discouraging the biotech firm Unicur from applying for expedited approval for a highly anticipated experimental Huntington's disease treatment. The biotech industry argues that this unpredictable rigidity stifles the necessary development of drugs for rare, fatal, hard-to-treat diseases where traditional clinical trials are impossible. Commissioner McCary actually appeared to publicly criticize Unicur's treatment data on CNBC, which severely amplified the internal tension and the calls for a leadership shakeup.
Wow. And just briefly on the domestic politics front, wrapping up this section, we have breaking news that the FBI has issued a sweeping subpoena to the Arizona State Senate, demanding records relating to the highly controversial 2020 Maricopa County election audit.
This is a highly significant development because it indicates that the Department of Justice is actively and aggressively expanding its ongoing probe into the 2020 election results and the various localized attempts to audit, challenge, or overturn those results in key swing states. This subpoena in Arizona comes just about 5 weeks after the FBI executed a raid on an election facility in Fulton County, Georgia, physically seizing ballots. It paints a clear picture of a coordinated, widening federal investigation into the mechanics of these state-level efforts.
Okay, we've talked about global wars, AI security, corporate monopolies, and federal investigations. Now let's zoom in on the micro level. I want to look at how everyday consumers are emotionally and financially reacting to all of this macroeconomic stress, inflation, and political tension. Let's start by looking at our neighbors to the north. Canadians are currently engaging in what they have dubbed the elbows up boycott of the United States.
Elbows up being a very apt hockey term repurposed for economic resistance. This grassroots movement is a direct, visceral response to President Trump's repeated inflammatory suggestions that Canada should simply be annexed as the 51st U.S. state, his insistence on belittling their prime minister by calling him a governor, and the sudden imposition of harsh, sweeping tariffs on Canadian exports.
And it is not just online chatter. The hard macroeconomic data shows a profound structural behavioral shift in how Canadians are spending their money.
Absolutely. Recent polling data from Ledger shows that over 60% of Canadians are actively, intentionally avoiding purchasing any U.S.-made products, specifically targeting visible exports like California wine, American bourbon, and U.S. produce. The Bank of Canada actually released a memo noting a structural change in the national economy as domestic Canadian brands rapidly gain wallet share at the expense of American multinationals.
It's heavily affecting the travel and tourism sectors, too.
Drastically. Flight capacity from Canada to incredibly popular U.S. snowbird destinations like Arizona and Florida is down 11% this year as airlines cut routes due to lack of demand. Canadian personal car crossings into the U.S. tumbled nearly 27% year over year in January. Ski resorts in places like Vermont and upstate New York are reporting that their usual influx of Canadian school trips has completely vanished. And this sentiment is being mirrored at the highest echelons of government. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney deliberately and visibly skipped the U.S. entirely on his recent global trade tour, signaling a pivot toward European and Asian markets.
I think the quote from Ontario resident Lisa McBean in our sources perfectly captures the deep psychological shift here. She said, "It is no longer a boycott. It's a change. It's a divorce." And even long-standing businesses are scrambling to hide their American ties to survive. There is a massage chain in Toronto called the Great American Back Rub that had to put up massive signs in their windows emphasizing their 100% Canadian ownership, and they are actively considering changing their brand name after 25 years in business just to stop the loss of clientele.
It is a fascinating, real-time case study in economic theory. It shows how aggressive geopolitical rhetoric can permanently alter deeply entrenched consumer psychology, degrade a nation's soft power, and force supply chains to decouple.
Let's talk about another profound shift in consumer habits. I want to ask you, the listener, to think about your own life for a second. Where do you go to hang out that isn't your office and isn't your living room? Historically, sociologists have referred to this as the third space, the local bar, the neighborhood coffee shop, the bowling alley, or the mall. But right now, driven by post-pandemic shifts, we're seeing a massive, explosive boom in wellness-focused third spaces.
The sociologist Ray Oldenburg coined the term third place to describe environments that are crucial for civil society, community building, and casual connection. But coming out of the pandemic lockdown, society is facing a historically unprecedented loneliness epidemic. Recent data from Cigna reported that a staggering 67% of Gen Z and 65% of millennials categorize themselves as fundamentally lonely. At the exact same time, demographic data shows these younger generations are drinking significantly less alcohol than their parents did. They are actively looking for healthier, more intentional ways to socialize.
Enter places like Bath House in New York. This company operates 90,000 square feet of impeccably designed facilities, and they expect to hit a $120 million run rate this year. For clarity, a run rate is a financial forecasting term. It means if you take their current monthly revenue and multiply it by 12, they are pacing to make $120 million annually. And they aren't alone. You have companies like Othership or Glow 30 expanding rapidly.
These are membership-based clubs and premium drop-in spaces centered entirely around communal wellness. They offer massive communal saunas, guided cold plunges, breathwork classes, and personalized skincare treatments. Crucially, they are intentionally designed to foster social connection without the crutch of alcohol or the deafening, isolating environment of a traditional nightclub. Grow 30, for example, intentionally schedules their aesthetic appointments on the hour. They do this so that groups of people constantly cross paths and naturally form social nodes in the communal waiting areas. They are engineering serendipity.
The founder of Othership noted that people are literally getting engaged inside their saunas. They host stand-up comedians and live musicians in these alcohol-free, high-heat environments. It perfectly aligns with the modern cultural trend that health is the new luxury. People are incredibly willing to pay a premium subscription fee to feel better physically while simultaneously curing their social isolation.
It is a highly profitable, perfectly timed market response to a severe societal deficit in meaningful, health-conscious human connection.
But, and this is the harsh reality of the current economy, not everyone has the disposable income for a luxury cold plunge membership. With gas prices spiking toward $4 a gallon due to the Strait of Hormuz crisis and cumulative inflation biting into wages, millions of people are turning to the side hustle economy just to survive the month.
The digital resale market is absolutely booming as people systematically clean out their closets and garages for fast cash. Platforms like Depop, which charges a relatively low 3.3% transaction fee plus 45 cents, have become incredibly popular, especially with Gen Z, for flipping vintage clothes. Mercari, which charges a higher 10% seller fee but offers a much wider marketplace for household goods, electronics, and tools, is also seeing massive spikes in daily active usage. And gig work platforms like Rover, which connects pet sitters with owners, offer highly flexible, immediate income streams.
But there is a much darker systemic side to this desperate need for fast cash, and that is the explosive rise of cash advance apps, technically known in the financial industry as earned wage access services.
Yes, apps like PayActive and Moneyline Instacash allow users to effectively borrow against the hours they have already worked but haven't been paid for yet. PayActive, for instance, lets you borrow up to 50% of your upcoming paycheck, capping out at $1,500. Moneyline offers up to $1,000 in advances for their premium tier customers.
And while they aggressively advertise no fees for standard bank transfers that take a few days, the reality is very different. If you need the money instantly, like if you are standing at a gas station looking at a $4 a gallon pump and your tank is empty, you get hit with steep instant transfer fees. It operates very similarly to a digital payday loan.
Exactly. And while these tools can genuinely be helpful in an absolute unforeseen emergency like a blown tire, financial experts issue severe, repeated warnings against normalizing their use. If you are relying on an advance just to cover everyday structural inflation gaps like permanently higher grocery or fuel costs, you become trapped in a highly dangerous cyclical debt loop. Your next paycheck is fundamentally already spent before it even hits your bank account, leaving you perpetually behind.
So, for you listening right now, take a moment to think about your own habits and decisions over the last few years. Are you actively seeking out new wellness communities to replace the local bar scene? Are you rethinking where you travel internationally based on geopolitical rhetoric? Or maybe picking up a side gig on Depop to fight off the reality of expensive gas? The macro-level news, the wars, the tariffs, the tech leaps always inevitably trickles down to alter our daily routines.
It absolutely does.
So what does this all mean? We've covered an immense, sprawling amount of ground today. We started with a historic global energy shock triggered by kinetic war in the Middle East. We watched billions of dollars flow through digital prediction markets and saw AI defense contracts scrutinized. We saw corporate monopolies in entertainment and pharmaceuticals being fiercely challenged. And we looked at how regular people are just trying to find community and make ends meet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are witnessing in the span of just a single chaotic week in March 2026 is a fundamental, rapid reordering of both global and domestic systems. We are seeing the extreme fragility of the global energy map exposed by a single 2-mile-wide geographic choke point. We are watching the weaponization and the desperate, necessary safeguarding of artificial intelligence unfold in real time. We see entrenched corporate titans in entertainment and pharmaceuticals being forced to compromise their business models. And at the ground level, everyday people are fundamentally changing how they travel across borders, how they socialize for their mental health, and how they survive financially in an unforgiving economic environment.
It is a world in rapid, unprecedented transition. And I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over today. We talked extensively about prediction markets taking highly liquid bets on the timing of a nuclear war. And we discussed autonomous AI agents requiring dedicated cybersecurity firms just to operate without causing enterprise chaos. Are we entering a new, strange era where the very concept of existential risk, the end of the world, or the loss of control to machines has simply become another digital product, just another asset class to be bought, sold, and traded by algorithms on a digital exchange?
That is certainly a profound, unsettling question to consider as these technologies mature and integrate into our society.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we've helped you make sense of this massive news cycle. Stay curious, keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you next time.